Well, now we're going to discuss the double-edged sword that is technology. Now, no doubt the future is going to be an entirely different place. They're going to have a lot of really positive technological advances, but we're going to kind of look at the history of some of this technology, which seems to have some pretty nefarious roots. Just off the top of my head, I can think of all the mind control technology that we've heard of in the past. MK Ultra and CIA mind control. Now, my guest today is going to break all of this down.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, what is your definition of technology? What is its purpose going forward in this really bizarre future we can kind of see for ourselves?
Well, I mean, as I evaluate technology and why it's always been important to me is fundamentally within a democratic republic, running your government requires a little bit of knowledge, and technology is in fact what makes governments powerful and strong in the 21st century. When you think about the power of governments, really it's supported by the power of modern technology. No matter how you view it, those with the technology control the program, so to speak.
Absolutely. And just kind of paraphrasing a Brzezinski quote, he talks about a more controlled society would be the result with this link to emerging technology everywhere. And you nailed it. So what are some noteworthy devices and experiments that people should be aware of?
Well, the big, when you think about Zbigniew Brzezinski's ideas about controlling human beings, he wrote a book called Between Two Ages back when he was at Columbia University. And he talked about that more directed and controlled society that would emerge out of technologies. And what he said was whether it were liberals or conservatives, they would have different rationale for using the technology for our own good, right? Because this is the nature of it. So you've got this type of leadership on the liberal side and the conservative side that both believe in a more directed and controlled society for maybe very different reasons, but the outcomes are the same. What we have seen is that drift, the direction of drift from really a society that could function freely to one that, think about it, all your medical records, your purchases, your credit card transactions, your bank transactions, your social interactions on the computers, your searches, all of that. Now imagine all that being collated, dissected, and analyzed, and then the ability to manipulate your personal behavior becomes possible because then the data feed you get can be more controlled, more directed to trigger your emotional state, to trigger what sort of fires you up. Very simple things can be applied once knowledge is obtained, and what we see now is this sort of wholesale grabbing of data, and really what needs to be protected is in fact our information, not just what's in our heads, but all of the things that we do that are tracked and cataloged should be looked at the same way as things within your household. The idea of personal privacy used to be the front door of your home. And today, it's your digital doorway. It's what enters the data into the record. And that should be protected just as vigorously as the front door to your house.
Right. And can you briefly describe a little bit of Jose Delgado's work experimenting with electrodes in the brain and his wireless experiments and all that?
Yeah. Jose Delgado started University of Madrid, class of 1950. He got his degree in electrophysiology, to study electromagnetic fields on the human body. He then went to Yale University, where he worked for a number of years. And in the 60s, what he was doing was essentially mapping the brain, determining what parts of the brain did different things, and then implanting electrodes, first in animals and then in humans, to see if you could stimulate effects by stimulating with radio signals parts of the brain. Now, this was done with implants back in the 60s and early 70s. By the 1980s, Jose Delgado had developed technology where you needed no implants whatsoever. The only thing that you needed to do was stimulate the brain with really, really low energy densities. I mean, energy concentrations at 1/50th of what the Earth naturally produces. I mean, this is just such a small amount of energy, most people would discount it, not even consider it. But it was found that just like dialing into a radio station, when you get right on that station and you get harmony between the transmitter and the receiver and you get a nice clear signal, the same thing happens with the human body. And as soon as you transit that resonant signal that couples to the human body, that's where the effects occur. So it doesn't take a lot of energy, and Delgado was kind of the leader of this, showing that with very, very light amounts of energy, you can create huge outcomes. Another gentleman, Persinger at Laurentian University in Canada, developed similar technologies and found that you could trigger all kinds of events. What he suggested in a mid-90s paper was that if you could just put a signal out that created a certain sense of agitation or dis-ease in the population, and then did something as simple as just run a normal news feed that perhaps indicted some group or some person for being the sort of the cause of all your ills, a certain amount of the population's emotion would be directed in that way. So in situations where you just need a few percentage points to kind of move outcomes, very effective technology. And Delgado was sort of the root of a lot of this science in terms of what the public is aware of today.
Now, when you talk about this wireless energy, I mean, are we talking about the same type of electromagnetic frequency that is being emitted with Wi-Fi signals?
Any signal can be modulated, where they can put a signal sort of on that. In other words, use the Wi-Fi signal as a carrier and then put a modulation on it that will couple with the human body. You can use any electromagnetic carrier. You can use computer, radio, television, the electric grid itself to create these kinds of effects. You can create the flicker effect. You can use electromagnetic fields. You can use any part of the spectrum if you can oscillate and modulate that signal in just the right way, and they can. And that's the root of the technology. Again, it's not the amount of power. It's the way you modulate, manipulate that energy that causes the coupling or the resonant effects in the human body.
And then, so, obviously the military use of microchip implants. Let's talk about, where they're going with that. And also, if you have any idea of the corporations and top producers of these type of technologies, who is benefiting by creating these?
Well, the idea of implant technologies has been around a long time, for tracking things. I mean, certainly it's kind of like the individual barcode, right? I mean, when government of Mexico and their Attorney General's office, over 200 people were microchipped to track all their movements and activities. These microcircuits can also determine a lot of things about your vital functions, in terms of your body functions. The idea of being able to track the movements of individuals, that's kind of the beginning of it. But as technology gets finer and finer and more sophisticated, you can do a lot more with it, being able to trigger events. But again, the need for an implant is being pressed, like in special forces today, to take an implant if you're going to go into a combat situation, so that if you got lost, they could find you. I mean, I can see the validity of that if I were going into a combat zone, and I want to make sure no matter if I strip down naked, they could still find me, right? But that's a real exceptional use of technology, a very specialized use. The idea of cashless societies and implants is something that people have talked about forever, and you see this sort of feed. First, you get this new technology that's so wonderful, it's going to protect you like magnetic strips on the back of a credit card, and then all of a sudden that's no good, so now we have microcircuits on credit cards. Eventually that's going to be no good, and it's going to be, well, let's make sure that we really know who this is by putting something in you and being able to track that. That's one idea. The other is just monitor your biology. I mean, look at your iris, look at your fingerprints. I mean, biological data is also an identifier that is often used. But when you see this sort of, again, the coalescing of technologies, you see the direction is really towards a more directed and controlled society, ultimately using the military often as guinea pigs for these experiments, which has been done historically. Even Secretary of Energy O'Leary during the Clinton administration admitted over 500,000 Americans were used as experimental guinea pigs for various programs. Many of them, military personnel, as well as other people that really didn't have the right or ability to speak up for themselves. Military are constrained in many ways from being able to object to this kind of activity.